All right, so in this video, I'm going to go over some terms that you need to know to do the activity for today, which is the pandemic gameplay. So the first term, pathogenicity. So this is a property of a pathogen. It's the ability of a pathogen to cause disease and harm in a host. So this is a very general term, and I've seen pathogenicity and the next term, virulence, used interchangeably. So basically, it varies with the microbe's ability to invade or harm a host and their tissues. And then virulence, a little bit different, is the degree of harm caused by a pathogen. So how violent the symptoms are, or how deadly the disease is that the pathogen creates. And then here's a picture that shows, so the more virulent a disease, the less transmissible it is. And I'm going to go over that word here in a second, transmissible. That makes sense if you think about a super virulent disease is going to keep you at home, right? It's going to keep you in bed. You might have really awful symptoms, including vomiting and diarrhea, so you're not going to go out into public. So if you stay at home and you're not around other people, the disease isn't going to transmit from one person to another. Whereas a disease that's less virulent and causes symptoms like sneezing, coughing, that disease can be transmitted very, very easily through respiratory droplets. And because you're not feeling as bad as you would if you had a disease where you have to stay at home, you're going to be around people in the public more. So there's a little connection there. So think about that for your gameplay today. So a few more points on pathogenicity and virulence. So pathogenicity, it can be specific or non-specific. And then this can also be correlated to the incubation period, which is the time in which a pathogen hangs out inside of you before you start showing symptoms. So some diseases can be spread during the incubation period, but usually that's not the case. Diseases like HIV and some flus can jump from one person to another while the person is not showing symptoms, which can be very, very dangerous, right? But most diseases, they're only spread when the person is showing symptoms like sneezing, coughing, things like that. So some examples of low versus high pathogenicity. So a bacteria that causes dysentery has a very low pathogenicity because that bacteria is only specific to um, mammals, usually humans and primates. Whereas a bacteria like Salmonella has a high pathogenicity because Salmonella can infect any vertebrate. So the degree to which those pathogens can cause diseases are very different because they're specific to either one type of organism, or it's a generalist, it's non-specific, and it can infect lots of different types of hosts. Another quick note here. So example, not all sexual partners of someone with an STD will get the disease. So that means that the pathogenicity of sexually transmitted diseases is dependent on how many people get that, or what percent of a person's partners get that disease. So it can be high or low depending. Virulence. So again, this is the ability of a pathogen to cause harm. It's usually correlated with the ability of a pathogen to multiply within its host. So the faster it multiplies and also where it multiplies can have an impact on the virulence. So some examples here, rabies is very, very virulent. Once the rabies virus gets into your body and passes your blood-brain barrier, there is a 100% mortality rate. There's been one known case in history where someone has survived the rabies virus after it has gotten into the nervous system. There's a girl up in Minnesota. I can post that article later if you guys would like. But other than that one case, that disease has a 100% mortality rate in the host. Will kill 100% of those that it infects. And then an example of a disease with a low virulence is the common cold, right? So almost all of us will get the common cold every year. It's a virus, but it has low virulence. There's not a lot of mortality in its hosts. Okay, two more terms. Transmissibility, which is another trait of a pathogen, is the ability or quality of a disease to be passed from one person to another, or one organism to another. So basically how it hops from person to person or organism to organism. And then susceptibility, this is a property of the host, and it refers to the ability of a host to be infected. So a few more points on these terms. So transmissibility, so some pathogens, like we've been talking about, are zoonotic, meaning they can hop from one species to another. So that's one mode of being transmissed. Another quick note, less virulent diseases and low incubation periods mean that the disease is more transmissible. So again, less virulent, meaning that the symptoms are not that bad, like sneezing, coughing, that disease can be spread more easily from one person to another. Then also the low incubation period, because if you have a high incubation period, you have an opportunity to interview those that have been in contact with somebody with the disease, and then you're able to quarantine them. Or if the incubation period is just 1 or 2 days, you're not going to have that time to intervene with the patient, and then they could be in contact with more people while they're showing symptoms, and you don't have time to quarantine them. So some examples, airborne pathogens like the flu and tuberculosis TB, which is a bacterial infection of the lungs, and direct physical and sexual contact, for example, HIV or the herpes virus, those are more transmissible. So direct physical contact, airborne respiratory droplets, those types of pathogens that move that way are transmitted at higher rates. Indirect physical contact, so if you touch a surface that somebody with the pathogen or with the disease has touched, that's a form of indirect contact. Also, water, so coming in contact with water that has a pathogen in it, that's another example of indirect contact. These types of transmissions we say they're low transmissibility. The incidence rate are not as high as direct contact. An example, noroviruses, those are viruses that can live on surfaces. There are some that are indefinitely. They can live on surfaces for many days. Those can cause indirect physical contact. And then fecal oral transmission, for example, lots of parasites hang out in poop and fecal matter, and then when a person comes in contact with that fecal matter, they get the disease. So those types of transmissions cause lower incidence. And the last note here, susceptibility. So healthy young individuals, also individuals who have been vaccinated or previously exposed to a pathogen, they are less susceptible to a disease. And then the older population and immunocompromised individuals are more susceptible. So immunocompromised meaning that their immune system is compromised, either because they have an underlying health issue. For example, HIV/AIDS can cause immunocompromised individuals, and then also people with cancer. All right, so now you guys have the information you need to know to do this activity. So you're going to do this handout, the epidemic gameplay. Again, please make sure that you're using Internet Explorer. It's not going to work. Have to use Internet Explorer. And then in these red boxes, take notes on why you're doing the things that you're doing, keeping these 3 terms in mind. So pathogenicity, virulence, transmissibility. So this activity is going to really act as a tool for you guys to familiarize yourself with these terms and start using them in a simulation. All right, so have fun playing this game, and I'll check in with you soon.